Welcome everyone to the Mary Baker Eddy Library. I'm Lesley Pitts. I'm the Executive Manager and President of the library and really want to welcome you warmly here tonight. The title of the program tonight is Nursing Spiritual Roots in Contemporary Practice. And for me, it's a very special subject, close to my heart. I've been a Christian Science nurse for over 30 years, both in the United Kingdom and here in America. And recently, I have left my practice of nursing, if you ever can stop being a nurse, and taken up the practice of Christian Science as a Christian Science practitioner in my community. I want to take you back to the late 1960s. Hope some of you can remember that time. The Beatles are consistently getting #1 hits on the hit parade. All You Need Is Love, Hey Jude, Carnaby Street is the place to be seen in London. And I'm a high school senior, and I'm ready for the bright lights. I'm on my way, I have my plan all laid out. And then suddenly that plan just seems to fall apart. Not because the thing I wanted to do stopped happening or I didn't get to do what I wanted to do, but something deep inside me told me I was on the wrong path, that this was not my journey. My family was gathered for the weekend, and although I never really used to ask my parents anything, I thought I knew everything for myself, I asked them, well, what career should I take up? What do you see me doing? Well, my parents hung back, and they really didn't give an answer. I think they found it very hard to think of me focusing on any one thing at that moment in time. But one of my aunts looked me straight in the eye and said, "You should be a nurse." And that was the farthest thing from my mind at that moment. Some of you may have had that experience yourselves. So I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because when I came to your home when I was sick, it was because of you I got better." So I said, "Well, why? I didn't really help you in any way." And she said, "Yes, you did. It was your inobtrusiveness as you came in and out of the room. It was your gentleness. It was your cheerfulness. And you always knew what to say when you came in. It was your love that healed me and made me better." Well, I went away and thought about that deeply. Spiritual qualities, not physical action. And it began to grow in my thought, and it was not long after that that I enrolled in a Christian Science nurses training program, and I was on my way to be a Christian Science nurse. And I had to learn the physical care of nursing. I had to learn how to take care of people who were sick physically. But it was the spiritual underpinning that stayed with me. It was the spiritual intuition that I gained in knowing what to do for a patient and when to do it. That was what stayed with me through all that 30 years of nursing and experience. And I've learned over the years that nursing is for everyone, everywhere. Those qualities of being solution-oriented, respectful of individuals, flexible and thorough, organized and gentle. You could go on and on with the qualities of nursing. They've been a model for me for management. And once a nurse, always a nurse. You can't just kind of leave it. It's always within you. And I see it for a model for humanity today. Florence Nightingale and Mary Baker Eddy had the same dates. They were born in 1821, and they both died in 1910. And they both wrote of the importance of a nurse's demeanor. They spoke about the nurse's spiritual roots. They did this in the 19th century. Both of these women led unconventional lives for the times that they lived in. And tonight, the three women we're going to have a conversation with, Jean, Peggy, and Linda, they're three unconventional nurses of our time. They're advancing our understanding of nursing in the 21st century. So let's get underway, and I'm going to hand over to Jonathan Eder, who's our programs manager here in the library, and Jonathan's going to introduce our panel to you tonight. So welcome.
Well, first of all, I'd like to echo Lesley's welcome to you all and say how delighted we are to have you all here at the Mary Baker Eddy Library this evening for Nursing Spiritual Roots in Contemporary Practice. But one very important thing I need to tell you, and all the nurses agree on this, and that is that it's very important for your cell phones to have a rest during this program. So if you could turn them off and make sure they have a good sound rest for the next 90 minutes, that would be great. We have with us a wonderful panel. Sitting right next to me is Jean Watson. And as I recall, you are Distinguished Professor of Nursing at the University of Colorado, and you are the founder of the Watson Caring Institute? Caring Science Institute in Boulder, Colorado. She's the author of many books and is a renowned speaker. So we're delighted to have you here, Jean. And sitting next to Jean is Linda Kohler, and she is Supervisor of Nursing Activities, Christian Science Nursing Activities. And sitting next to Linda is Peggy Burkhardt, and she is Professor of Nursing at West Virginia University. And both Jean and Peggy have written books, and so after the program, you'll be able to sample those and have a look and perhaps buy them if you're interested. Mary Baker Eddy was very, very devoted to the concepts that we are going to be exploring this evening. Caring and healing were really the focus of her energies, her thought, her life, her career. And here at the Mary Baker Eddy Library, we care for that history, and we make available through our archives, through our collections, through our exhibits, this history of this woman who was so devoted to the concepts that we're going to be discussing tonight, and also to the greater themes that we represent in our collections and in our exhibits about healing, about transformation, and about progress. So I'm just very interested, as we get going this evening, to hear from our panelists about their individual journeys and what has animated them as nurses and in this field of endeavor where caring and healing are such inspirations and so important. So without further ado, Linda, would you please?
Sure, I'll start, and let me just say what an honor it is to be here with these two ladies. I have enjoyed getting to know them through some of their writings and also spending some time together with them today preparing for this program, and I have so much respect for what you both bring to the table here. Jonathan asked if we would each just tell a little bit about how we came into nursing, and for me, what drew me to Christian Science nursing, I think, was just that I wanted to grow spiritually. I was in my last year of undergraduate school, and like Lesley said, nursing was the farthest thing from my mind. I was grooming myself for a career in theater when a friend introduced me to a book I had never heard of before. It was Mary Baker Eddy's primary writing, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. Now, I had grown up being very familiar with the inside of a doctor's office. At the time that I read Science and Health, I was on medication, daily medication for sinus problems and stomach problems. So here was this book telling me that the real cause of my problems was mental, and that the medication that I was taking had only the power of my own belief in it. and that genuine healing could be found in a better understanding of God. Well, I read that book and I wrestled with and pondered those ideas for several months, and I found that at the end of a few months, I really didn't believe in the medication anymore, so I stopped taking it. And I found that I felt perfectly fine. I could eat anything I wanted to eat with no problems anymore. I felt better than I had felt in years. And that was great. But even better and even more impressive to me was what was happening to my character as I assimilated these ideas. The more I read Science and Health along with the Bible, the more I found in those pages a spiritual integrity and a depth that I think had been missing in my life up to that point, and I knew that I really wanted it. There was just a hunger in my heart to be more spiritually minded. And then I found out there were Christian Science nurses. Now, who would have thought there would be such a thing as a Christian Science nurse? I mean, when I tell people what I do today, I usually get this kind of puzzled look. Wait a minute, I thought Christian Scientists didn't go to doctors. And, you know, generally speaking, that's about as much as some people know about Christian Science. And while it's true that generally Christian Scientists will choose not to go to doctors, when we get sick, we very much want to get better, and we're usually willing to call on resources to help us with that if we need it. Maybe it would help if at this point I explain just a little bit, and I'll do it briefly, about how Christian Science heals. It's a big subject. I can't really do it justice here, but I'll sort of give you the condensed version. Christian Science is a Christian religion. It has nothing to do with Scientology. It's rooted firmly in the Bible. Mary Baker Eddy was a very deep student of the Bible, and if you read Science and Health, you will see the Bible either quoted or referenced on just about every page of the book. But I think Mary Baker Eddy didn't see the Bible as merely reassuring or sort of psychologically comforting. She saw in the pages of the Bible a God that is consistent, accessible, and understandable. I think one of her primary contributions was her insistence that God can be understood, and that human problems like illnesses are really opportunities to understand God better and to understand our relationship to Him. You know, Jean speaks so often in her books about the need to look beyond the physical picture, to look beyond what's on the surface, that there's also a spiritual need that we as nurses need to be attuned to. And I think that's a very important concept in Christian Science. In addition to Christian Science nurses, there are what we call Christian Science practitioners. These are professional healers who are putting the science of Christianity into practice. They pray for others, but this Christian Science treatment prayer isn't so much a pleading with God to make someone better as it is a grateful affirmation of God's goodness and power, and also an affirmation that the patient is naturally able to understand and feel God's love and care. This kind of prayer is sort of like turning on a light in the dark room. The spirit is revived, the heart is awakened, and healing follows. So, now where does the Christian Science nurse come into all of this? Well, Mary Baker Eddy was immensely practical, and she saw that there were some cases under Christian Science treatment where some physical care was needed while the healing work was being carried on, and that care needed to be done with skill, with good judgment, and with spiritual mindedness. So she actually incorporated into the governing bylaws of our church a provision for Christian Science nursing. Now, when I found out that I could become a Christian Science nurse, I think I knew intuitively that this was a place where I would grow spiritually because it would demand me to grow spiritually, that it would call me to draw on such deep resources of unselfishness and patience that I would really have to grow in order to do that. And I wanted to keep that spiritual growth going in my life. There's a poem that's meant a lot to me over the years. It's found in the Christian Science hymnal, and it says, "Make channels for the streams of love, where they may broadly run, and love has overflowing streams to fill them, every one." And for all the nurses in the audience and the Christian Science nurses, I think this is what we do when we decide to become nurses and Christian Science nurses. We're opening our lives and our hearts to let these streams of love flow through. And if I thought that the love was mine, and it was my own personal well I was drawing on, I probably, as I poured it out, would begin to feel empty and drained. But to understand that the love comes from a source that's beyond me, and that I'm just opening my life and my heart to letting it flow through me, means that I am open to infinite reservoirs of love and patience and compassion and unselfishness. So subjecting myself to this stream of love not only blesses the people I'm there to help, but the streams purify me and bless me in the process. And so that's what has drawn me to Christian Science nursing and brings me here tonight.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Peggy, if you could just share a little bit about your experience and how spiritual roots of nursing have informed
me. Well, what I'm going to do is just touch on a variety of things that have helped to shape me in this, and not necessarily chronologically. Although I would say that because of feeling very spiritually grounded in my growing up, and I grew up in a Catholic tradition, and felt very connected to prayer. Okay, all right, so that this doesn't keep bounding, thank you. Anyway, just coming back to that is that I think that sense of feeling myself drawn to be of service is what led me into nursing. And at the time, not having any particular sense of saying, oh, I'm doing this because it's a spiritual path, that's something that has unfolded in my experiences through the years. And those experiences have come in different ways. I think a lot of the time in my nursing education, they were sort of parallel, even though I felt like I was acting from my spiritual base. That I started understanding more that sense of what I've incorporated more into the idea of the holistic nursing practice, that we are body, mind, spirit beings, and we cannot not be spiritual. A lot of times in nursing, at least as I was in my earlier education, nurses would attend to spirituality by finding out what religion a person was, maybe knowing a little bit about some of the practices, maybe calling in a chaplain or a pastor, but that was considered spiritual care. And because of, I'm a nurse in the allopathic tradition, at least my training, it's been broadened with more integrative kinds of thoughts and ideas and practices. But there was like a wonderful sense in science where science split off from the spiritual beginnings of healthcare, going back to both Judeo-Christian scriptures and medieval times and so forth, where the priests and nuns were the healers. And then when science, especially modern medicine, started coming along, there was this nice little sense of saying, well, the church said, well, we'll take the soul and you can have the body. And so there was a split, and that's kind of what's informed a lot of our Western medical tradition. So what I found in my own journey is that sense of reintegrating that. And when I was a very young nurse, my probably second year out of my basic nursing program, I worked with the Navajo people in New Mexico. And I did field health nursing, home visiting, which for me was a very, very, not just informative, but that helped to shape my sense of what holism is. Because in the Navajo tradition, what I saw was that most of the people I worked with, Navajo was their first language. They were still very, very traditional. And when someone became sick, they would come to the Western practitioners for a diagnosis and for some treatments. However, in their healing tradition, there were 3 levels of healers. One was an herbalist, one was a diagnostician, but the one who actually brought healing was the singer. And healing in their tradition is returning everything to harmony with nature. And that harmony is within oneself, one's whole body, mind, spirit, being, within the community. Their healing ceremonies include the whole community and with the natural world, recognizing that all of this is important in relation to who we are in our health and healing in the world. And in seeing that, I began to recognize that healing is different from curing, especially, again, in the traditional medical sense, where curing means, okay, we've taken care of your problem. The pain's gone away because we gave you medicine or we did surgery. That's very simplistic, and I apologize to those in the audience, that it's not so cut and dry, but that's kind of the sense of the basic sense of curing. You take care, if something's going wrong, you eliminate the problem in some way or another. My sense of healing, especially as I began to study this more based on my experiences with the Navajo, is that healing is a spiritual process. In the Navajo tradition, almost all of their spiritual ceremonies, I won't call them religious because they don't necessarily look at it that way, are healing ceremonies. And what I began to do as I studied and explored more in nursing and other traditions is to discover that more and more, that healing, in my sense of healing, and all words that we use can have many meanings. And so my understanding of healing is that sense of returning harmony, balance, wholeness. The word health, healing, wholeness all come from the same root words. The Old English hal, Greek holos, which means whole. And that sense of wholeness is, in my sense, returning to the essence and the essential part of who I am as a body, mind, spirit being, but recognizing that my spiritual being is the core. So that as my journey unfolded and I started exploring more of this sense of the importance of healing as a process, I began to look at that more in relation to nursing. And as I read more with Florence Nightingale and other wonderful, I'll say, mentors, and Jean Watson for me is one of them, because as I read her theory and learned more of the caring, to me that also brings it around to the sense that the essence of nursing is healing, contrasted with curing, which is really the focus of medicine. And that's not to say that we don't overlap. I mean, it's like the yin-yang. We're never all only masculine or feminine, healing or curing. But that, to me, is what nursing is about, is healing. And the thing that I have also seen over my years in nursing is that because of the increase in technology and the science and so forth, unfortunately, nursing has moved more toward the medical sense of losing touch with the roots. And so that's an important thing that I feel is important in bringing us all back to that sense that who we are as human beings is that we are spiritual beings, and that we need to attend to the body, mind, spirit if healing is to take place. And something else that in reading and studying Florence Nightingale's works that she will talk about is how important it is that we attend to the whole body, mind, spirit, being, and that we pay attention to that our being, our beingness as a nurse, how I am with someone is more important, I think, than what I do, because what I do needs to flow from that essence. If I'm not centered in myself and caring for myself as a spiritual being, I don't have that to bring to someone else. And one of the other things in relation to all of this is that sense that I think the essence of spirituality, and we'll talk about this more, we were talking about this earlier, is that love is the healer. And love, however one feels or experiences that, and sometimes love, we say, is the essence of God or goddess, however one experiences that power, that source that is other or within. And that's something I won't say a whole lot about now because I know Jean's going to say more about that. So I'll just stop for where I am now. And
Well, thank you so much, Peggy.
okay.
Yeah, Jean, I'd love to hear about your journey and your ideas, your vision.
Right. Well, I grew up in a very small town in West Virginia, which is where Peggy is now. And I was very informed by close relationships. And I wasn't aware of going into nursing as a career necessarily, but I remember an incident where my sister's friend had an epileptic seizure. And I remember this incredible, like I was only about 11 years old or something, but I remember this incredible urge to be able to be of service and to be able to help her. And of course I couldn't. I mean, I sort of tried to, but in any event, that always kind of stayed with me. And so I went to nursing school, but I was very dispirited and very disappointed at two levels. One was because I was hungry for someone to address the deep dimensions of what I felt I was experiencing with patients and witnessing and just being in relationship and learning about them and understanding what was going on with them and their fears and how they were related to their family. And no one ever had any voice or any concepts or any frameworks or theories or concepts. This is in the late 60s, okay? And so I was frustrated because I felt I wasn't getting an education. And during my psychiatric nursing experience, for the first time, I was exposed to these ideas in this hall of ideas. And they were concepts like relativism versus absolutisms and understanding human behavior and health and illness and the inner subjective world of the experiencing person and what was the meaning that this was having for the person in contrast to just this external awareness and diagnosis and so forth and all the external tasks and skills. And at that time, I was also exposed to a faculty member who was actually getting her doctorate in nursing here in Boston, of all places, which is the origin of a lot of the early doctoral programs in nursing. And I was stunned because I thought, you can get a doctorate in nursing? And at that moment, that's what I'm going to do. And I pursued my PhD, but not in nursing because I was from Colorado and we didn't have PhDs in that area at the time. There were only 4 or 5, maybe 20 were within that decade. In any event, I got my PhD in educational psychology and counseling, and again, being so excited when I was exposed to the concept of phenomenological psychology and philosophy and values and existentialism and spiritual dimensions of our existence. And then I joined the faculty at the University of Colorado, and again, my heart dropped because here we were. Okay, I'm a faculty member at the University of Colorado School of Nursing, a major academic health science center, School of Medicine, School of Dentistry, School of Pharmacy, Biomedical Sciences, School of Nursing. And what was nursing doing? Where was nursing? Medicine's here, nursing's here, underneath medicine. And getting more and more specialized, subspecialized, medicalized, clinicalized views of our humanity. And I'm thinking, well, why am I here on the University of Colorado in an academic discipline of nursing? What is our science model? What is our philosophy? What is our distinction? Is there a meaningful philosophical foundation for our science, our practice, that we're here to balance and complement traditional medical science, conventional medical science and technology, but there was no vision, there was no articulation, there was no voice for that at the time that at least I was not exposed to it. So I remember the first day I started writing my book, my first book, called Nursing, The Philosophy and Science of Caring. And in that book, I was addressing the question for myself, really. If you took all the skills and tasks and threw, and eliminated those, because you cannot define nursing by what we do. And that's always changing. What we do is always changing. So I was asking myself the question, is there a core that would really be timeless, that would transcend diagnosis and setting and population and so forth? And that's when I came up with these 10 curative factors, which were balancing and complementary to curative factors. And as my work has evolved, I'm now calling those, I've expanded those dimensions to refer to them as caritas processes. And I'm using the word caritas very specifically. It's Latin origin, but it really brings caring and love together. And it brings caring and love and healing together in the most ancient, if you will, knowledge or wisdom traditions across time, up through Florence Nightingale, through Mary Baker Eddy, to the most contemporary science models. Because now I'm actually working on this broader caring science, a sacred science, and acknowledging and using the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas, who's a French philosopher, and Node Logstrom, who really emphasize ethics comes before our science. And they refer to the ethics of belonging, that we all belong to this infinite field of universal love as our source for our existence, and we draw upon that. And we all belong to that infinite field of universal love before we are our separate beings, which connects us as our human experience. And with that, the Logstrom's philosophy is that we hold another person's life in our hands. And so this connection between caring and love and healing is now coming to this acknowledgement, even in contemporary mind, body, spirit science and the work of consciousness and so forth, that perhaps we can now acknowledge that the greatest source of all healing is love and the energy of love. So I'm working now with heart math that some of you may have heard about, www.heartmath.com. They have about 18 years of research on the heart and bringing together the science of caring and the science of the heart really connects up some of these pieces that we're all kind of experiencing some convergence as a reminder and showing scientifically that when we work from this heart-centered space of love and fall into that place, not only are we more coherent, but it's acknowledging scientifically that the heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. So when we shut down our heart, we harden ourselves, we become separate, we really disconnect ourselves from the depths of our humanity, the source of our love, the source of our healing. And so it's a reminder, both in metaphorical terms as well as scientific terms, that when you work from this heart-centered space, it is the source for connecting with source. And it is the source of our truth. It's the source of beauty. It's the source of compassion. It's the source of love. It's the source of grace. It's the source of sustaining our humanity. So this ethics of belonging, the ethics of love, the ethics of caring, health, and healing allows us to really see a full circle from the origins of our calling, so to speak, because again, Nightingale was very clear that nursing is a calling, that we're here. We're like, what are our gifts? What are our talents? Why are we here on this earth plane? And when we work from the heart, it will guide us. And some of this recent work is actually referring to the intelligent heart and showing that when we work from the heart, we actually are radiating out an electromagnetic field that can be measured 8 to 10 feet beyond us. And I'm involved right now with a network of hospitals, and they have named themselves the International Caritas Consortium. And it's very organic. It's people who come together to want to learn more about going deeper into this Caritas caring and love and healing model. It's not just my work, but it also draws upon these other dimensions. And they're using this caring theory as a guide to professional practice changes. And these hospitals that are authentically doing this are actually working with the nurses through this caring consciousness, through this heart-centered practice, through very concrete kind of activities, like, for example, pausing before you go into a patient's room, paying attention to your presence, what is your consciousness? And that was one of the things that I loved today about the experience here, in realizing the explicit and exquisite focus that you have for Christian Science nursing is that your consciousness and your very presence and your mindset comes before any of the technology. But in our traditional systems of education, we teach all the technology and we do very little with preparing the nurses for their consciousness, their intentionality, their human presence as the instrument, and how we have to be in tune to be the instrument. And yet that's rarely attended to until more recently, because we're so desperate for going back to the core of our existence, of our human existence.
But you know, I do think that you and Peggy both have been very vocal in saying, as you said earlier, love is the most potent healer. Love is the healer. And starting with that recognition, that gives you a whole new paradigm for your work. Since we're in the Mary Baker Eddy Library, I think that that's an idea that Mary Baker Eddy has articulated very well in her books. And if I could just read a couple of places, in Science and Health, the book I referred to earlier, she said, God is love. More than this we cannot ask. Higher we cannot look. Farther we cannot go. I mean, if you start with that as the basis of action, and there's one other place I'd love to read. I just find this so inspiring. This is in a collection of some of her letters and other writings, and she says, love, what a word. I am in awe before it. No word is more misunderstood. No sentiment, no word is more misconstrued. No sentiment less understood. Love is not something put upon a shelf to be taken down on rare occasions with sugar tongs and laid on a rose leaf. I make strong demands on love, call for active witnesses to prove it, and noble sacrifices and grand achievements as its results. Unless these appear, I cast aside the word as a sham and a counterfeit, having no ring of the true metal. Love cannot be a mere abstraction or goodness without activity and power. And I think that's some of what you two are really promoting in the medical field, is a recognition that love is not just some sort of nebulous, nice thought. It is a power, and it's a power that needs to be brought into the sick room as a factor in healing.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that in the sense, particularly as you're saying that love, because love is a word that, whether it be in the Beatles song, as you mentioned, all you need is love, which is true. But I think that in our world, love has so many, it's so much is more the eros rather than the kairos, which is really that sense of the essence of love. And one of the things, I just jotted down a couple of things from that Nightingale. These aren't direct quotes, but one of the things that she talks about is that sense of becoming the consciousness of God, and that's what we are called to do and to be more than to do. And again, there's that sense of the being. She says that the source or the food of all of our actions, words, and thoughts is the indwelling presence of God, which, again, in my understanding, and this is filtered through my own sense of spirituality, is love. That God is love, and that whole sense of God is love, and who abides in love abides in God. and that it is that presence.
You know, Jean, earlier you were talking about the exquisite experience that you'd had before, and just to clarify, the four of us went to a visit to the Chestnut Hill Benevolent Association, a Christian Science nursing facility earlier today, and you know, I know for me that was a healing experience, and I didn't think I was coming in with any kind of problem, but I felt a lot better for having been there. But there was just that sense of graciousness and respect and love for the individual. And you know, I'm just curious what your impressions were today from our visit this morning, and just any things you would like to extrapolate from it.
I felt like I was going to faint at one point, to tell you the truth. It was so beautiful. When I felt like I was had this transcendent moment, because there was something powerful about that sense of presence that was greater than us, particularly when we were talking about entering into the space with another person with that broader consciousness, not just to go into there to do a skill or a task, but that whole environment was a very inspiring and affirming experience for me, very personally as well as professionally. And I felt from Linda, when she was describing some of the Christian Science nursing approaches, I felt like you were radiating out that electromagnetic field of the heart and love 8 to 10 feet beyond you. It was palpable.
Well, it is something I love. It's a subject that I love, so I was doing it.
Oh, I agree with that. It was just real evident, and not just with Linda, but with, look, I know Geneva, who's back there, and I thought I saw Carol around here someplace too. That, to me, there was just such a peacefulness, and a peacefulness of, within, that sort of inner peace, and being in the setting. I mean, I would love to have an opportunity for my nursing students to be in a setting of learning, like you had there, because there is that sense of, again, how do we teach, where do we teach? And my experience in being at Chestnut Hill, that the whole setting was, in walking in, I felt the sacred space of this setting, which unfortunately I don't experience whenever I have to go into most hospitals, which I don't do that often. I will say, part of my nursing journey is I'm one of those rare nurses who has never worked in a hospital in any of my professional life. I went right into community nursing and then into primary care as a nurse practitioner, and so that may have been something that unconsciously I did as a self-protective, because I feel that unfortunately our allopathic, Western, I shouldn't just say allopathic, Western medical centers that we call hospitals, most of them are fairly toxic, and for many, many reasons, and that's another reason I'm very grateful for Jean's working more with hospitals to bring a more healing environment, because it's that sense of, and it's something else that Florence Nightingale mentions, and I know that you had, some of the things we talked about in relation to the Christian Science nursing, looking at what does it take to make the environment such so that the person can experience the healing.
And an important aspect of the environment is what we're thinking and feeling. Mary Baker Eddy doesn't talk in her books about what the lighting should be or what the quality of the air should be, but she talks about the kind of thinking that the nurse should bring into the room in several places. One thing she says is that it is important in metaphysical practice that the minds which surround your patient should not act against your influence by continually expressing such opinions as may alarm or discourage, either by giving antagonistic advice or through unspoken thoughts resting on your patients. And as we've talked today, I think we've all agreed that what the nurse is thinking, and for the nurse to bring a sense of spirituality, a sense of confidence, a sense of trust and expectancy of good into the room is something the patient feels and responds to.
Absolutely. And now we know this science model that underpins this, because this whole awareness that we have to now pay as much attention to the subtle environment as we do to perhaps the aesthetics and the healing physical environment. And that subtle environment is the consciousness. It is what we carry in our hearts matters in this new awakening, because it is absolutely being communicated. And now, we've always sensed it, but now to have a science to underpin this makes us like, okay, we really have to pay attention. Where are we? Who are we? And it's both transformation of self and system. I don't think we can ethically keep churning out nurses to do these kind of practices that are so destructive and so parasitic to themselves and to society and to the patients and to the system themselves. And that's where I think the true changes are coming, where hospitals are authentically committed, selectively, to totally reframing and redesigning the healing for the practitioners. I was working with the Navajos back in the summer with a Navajo nursing group. And they were, the head of nursing, actually this is from her, I have to honor her, it's her turtle she gave me. But she said, we can't do this with patients. We have to start first with our nurses. Where nurses are so wounded through their desire coming into this profession with this deeper sense of love and service to humanity. And then we get socialized and professionalized into these practices that cut out our humanity, cut off our caring, cut off our heart, and move us into this other kind of model. And nurses are hungry for opportunities to return to their practice. And as we work with systems to be committed to changing nursing, it's changing the whole system. So my vision is the future has to be, these hospitals have to become caring and healing centers.
Mm-hmm. Which is something I really experienced today. I mean,
yes.
that was definitely a caring, healing center. And in some ways, it made me think of things that I've read in relation to some of the healing temples in ancient Greece.
Yes.
That people would come to the temple, and a lot of times it was the priests, the priestesses, their job was just to help the person move into the situation that would be healing. And there was just that sense of just come in here, and that is a healing space.
Well, I have so many questions for you, but I'm not going to be selfish. We're going to open up the conversation to the rest of you. We have a stand-up mic here in the center of the room. So we invite you to take a moment to think, and then come up to the mic if you have a question, and our panel will be happy to answer.
Thank you all so much. It's been a thrilling evening listening to you all. I moved here about 7 months ago from New York State, and prior to that had attended some meetings sponsored by the governor about socializing healthcare, having a blanket plan for all citizens of the state. And one of the things that's been very, very difficult is trying to figure out how to define what proper care is so that the government could fund it. And as I'm listening to all of you, I'm thinking, for example, one of the issues that was brought up last year was how do you define nurse? And there was a significant contingent that wanted to define it as an allopathic care individual, and no other definition would be allowed in terms of a government-funded plan. And that would put all of you kind of at odds with a socialized healthcare system. I don't know if any of you want to respond to where you see yourselves in or out of a socialized healthcare system.
Well, I certainly see my work is certainly located within the allopathic system, but within a caring and healing philosophy, ethic, theory, practice model that balances and complements the finest. Right now, in the conventional system we need the finest of what we still have of medicine, is that's what we need, but we also need the finest of what nursing has to offer. Another way of seeing this is that medicine, energetically, is all about yang energy. You can't heal with yang energy. Healing requires yin energy. It requires caring and healing, love. And so putting them together, we have a whole different healthcare system that's not just using 80% of our dollars for 20% of the population, but we're, you know, it's a continuum for prevention and so forth, and I don't have any answers at the political level, but it's just that we know that it's broken, and we keep trying to fix the old model, and something new has to be birthed.
And that makes me think of something that, again, I'm paraphrasing, that Einstein said, I think, that we cannot solve a problem with the same mindset or the same thinking that started it. And so I think that's part of the healing of the healthcare system. One of the things that is something I think we just need to work on as a society, and that is ownership of a title. And I know this comes up. It's come up. I live in West Virginia. It's come up in different kinds of ways. You know, who can do certain things? You know, if you have to be titled this kind of massage therapist to be able to do this, or you know, you can only do counseling if you're a social worker, and get reimbursed from Medicaid, not if you're a licensed counselor. I mean, there are things like that that are all these jockeying for territory and so forth. So as far as that sense of who defines what a nurse is, I think that's something that we all as citizens need to really be vocal about, that we don't let somebody say that I'm the only one that can do this. I mean, that's something that, say, nursing and medicine has been going on for any number of years, that allopathic medicine historically has said, well, we're the only ones who can practice medicine, and for so long, anybody else, whether it be homeopathic, osteopathic, chiropractic, were considered quacks, I guess is the word that came out. That's changing. I mean, and part of that, again, is that we're getting more scientific research in relation to the importance and the value of those traditions. But I think we have to, as a society, be real careful, and when we hear things like that going on, to be vocal that we don't allow that to happen.
I think the other reality is that, I mean, just using Christian Science nursing that I learned about today, that you have reimbursement for Medicaid, right? And one of the insurance companies is now reimbursing them for Christian Science nursing. And so I'm thinking, well, if you're going to have new legislation around how you define a nurse, and this is already government approved, that should be folded in, giving some exception for that or some way to integrate that into holistic practices.
But Peggy is right in that the laws about titles, use of titles, can be restrictive, and I don't think they start out intending to be restrictive, but the predominant model in our society is that a nurse is someone who's medically trained and certified, and so when we raise our hands and say, but what about us? To just find that there could be a respect that would recognize that this is also a legitimate healing practice. It is practical, it is responsible, and that there can be space in the law, as there are in many states, for acknowledging the use of the title Christian Science nurse in addition.
That's what I think.
And a lot of times I think government, part of their job, if you will, is to help to protect society, and so there's that sense of setting standards so that not anybody can just go out on the street and say, I'm a Christian Science nurse. There is a whole process of saying we acknowledge that you have met certain criteria in the same way that nobody can go out there and say, I'm a nurse practitioner without saying, here are my credentials. And so I think that that kind of a balance. And something else, and this is just going back to when Jean was talking about nursing and medicine, is to recognize that all of us have yin yang, and so there are some very, very caring physicians who are out there, in the same way that there are some very, I'd say more technical nurses who maybe don't integrate caring as well, and so we need to look for that in our own practitioners. Is who do we want to see and be with?
I'm going to bring us into the 21st century a little bit, because I want to kind of expand the issue of love and put a different label on it, because that's what has made sense for me. One of the things that I did some work on some years ago was Loystrup's work, and when I was in Scandinavia doing some teaching and some work. And one of the things that Loystrup talks about is the importance of meeting the other. And for me, that was the thing that really made sense, because sometimes the issue of love and the labeling of love made it feel like it had to come from me, and it was one directed out at somebody else. And unless I still had that, it was still, the burden was on me to be loving, per se. So meeting the other meant that sense of what you've been talking about centering and being present, and meeting the other means to meet somebody who's different than you and to try to put aside those prejudices or those preconceived, not necessarily biases. So having said that, one of the things that I think that is happening, and this is because you talked about technology before, and the work that I do is around computer-mediated communication, electronic health records, the web, the internet, email. We all know about all those things. And there's a lot of fear is that what that's going to do is actually separate us more than bring us together. And one of the things that I think is seeing, and this is the question, and it's not a direct question, but what's happened is that it's no longer something that we have control over, because of the technology, what has happened is that the knowledge has kind of become free, and it's become accessible to the other, where before the burden, we kind of control that knowledge in our discipline, whether we are physicians or social workers or psychologists or nurses. And what's happened now is that we actually don't have the privilege, if that's what it could be, of being the burden of carrying the responsibility of the love or of meeting the other, because the other now is our patients who are coming to us, and in many ways they know more than we do. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little, because the shift is happening between provider and patient, that it's becoming equalized, and we have to collaborate. Which is in many ways what you're talking about is, the transpersonal caring, meeting the other, recognizing, kind of centering ourselves. So if you can bring us into the 21st century and talk a little about technology, and can we do this with technology?
Okay, Lena, thank you. Oh, let me think. About 10 years ago, I gave a paper at Martha Rogers, a Rogerian conference on space and nursing. And one of the things I said, I don't know if this is a little far out, but it was something like, on earth is in heaven, or on heaven, and heaven is on earth. And then reframed the notion of space, rather than space being something that separated us, that space connected us. And so just with that thought of one of the things that happens, as we know with the internet and with email, is that we have this consciousness connection. It's a disembodied connection, but it's a connection, but it's through the consciousness. You connect with another person's mind or their thoughts. And that has that potential to energetically communicate and find out who is this person from their frame of reference, does it not? Because you don't see them physically, so you don't have that image of whatever comes to you energetically, but you can communicate energetically those feelings of love, can you not? I mean, you've experimented with this, Lena, I know you do this. And students will give you feedback that there is a way you can still convey that energetically through the virtual communication. That's just one thought. There was an article I wrote, and I'm sure you've probably seen it. It's called The Metaphysics of Virtual Communication. And some of this notion is in there, cautioning us a little bit about the disembodied connection, because I think that does take away the human-to-human fullness of our connection. And it does relate to Levinas's philosophy too, because he talks about not only the ethic of belonging that I mentioned, that we all belong to this infinite field of love, but he also says, he talks about the ethic of face, which is beautiful. And he says, the only way at this point in human history we can preserve humanity is through the face-to-face connection. And he says it's through the face-to-face connection that you look into the face of another person and it mirrors back the infinity and the mystery of the human soul. And therefore it mirrors back to you the mystery and the infinity of your soul. And it's that connection at that human-to-human face level that connects us with that shared source, that infinite field of belonging that allows the humanity to evolve. And the opposite of evolving is the totalizing of humanity and destruction of humanity. And my colleague Sally Godot puts this in a beautiful way. She says, in the first instance, person gets reduced to patient, and then patient gets reduced to body physical, and then body physical gets reduced to machine. And then putting this Levinas and this carrying theory with this spin, this subtle downward turn, what happens when we've reduced another person to this machine-like status, we've reduced them to the moral status of an object. And as soon as we reduce another human being to the moral status of object, we've set up a scenario whereby we can justify doing something to other as object. We can totalize them, we can dismiss them, we can objectify them, and do things to them as object we would never do to them as fully functioning person. And not only that, we know that one person's level of humanity reflects on the other. So if we're reducing another to this moral status of object, we're also doing it back to ourselves. So this whole ethic, if you will, of face and how we reconcile that by still being in this virtual world is one of our biggest challenges, perhaps, at this point in human history. And that's one of the things that I think nursing actually has both worlds. We're both in both of these worlds. And yet, I feel that this physical touch and the physical caring is something that allows us to help preserve humanity. And in one of my first books, I actually talked that one of the outcomes of nursing was really to preserve humanity. It's not just to have nurses conform to these systems to treat, contribute to medicine treatment, but it's really they're sustaining humanity, preserving human dignity, alleviating vulnerability, sustaining integrity. Those are the deeper things that we're doing in a caring model, in an ethic, which is helping to preserve humanity and helping humanity to evolve. Thanks.
Hello.
First of all, I'd just like to say thank you for sharing all your enlightenment. My heart's racing. There's something going on here. 10 days ago, I had this idea to, with our Nurses Week, just have like a coffee clutch, which is like tonight, and just talk about these moments that happen to us, unexplained and yet in front of us all the time, and yet we never really share them collectively. We go home and maybe our loved ones will know about it or some. And I volunteered to try to do something like this, which I would never do. And then 2 days later, I get an email saying that this was going to transpire. And I thought, obviously, I need to come here because the law of synchronicity works very well for me. I usually just stumble into something. So I started the process, found you people. I'll be doing a lot of reading until May. And I just can't thank you for sharing all of this because it's just very exciting. I started nursing 33 years ago, but I started my spiritual journey 19 years ago, and I'm still scared to death to expose it. But you've given me a lot of courage and strength, and I hope that I'll be able to do something with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I have to say that I just admire so much the courage of these two women speaking up so articulately and clearly and vehemently about the importance of spirituality in nursing. I just think you're providing a wonderful service to mankind. So
You have to know that I'm teaching what I need to learn.
Exactly.
I'm still trying to learn this myself and live this myself. So.
And with that, and I appreciate your comments and your courage even in getting up and saying that, I could tell. But one of the things that also reminded me of something I wanted to say tonight too is that in my sense of spirituality and healing, that the spiritual journey is a healing journey, is a life journey. that spirituality isn't something that I do, it's something that I am. Healing has to flow from who I am, and it has to be my journey, that is. And exactly what Jean says, I mean, what I've said tonight, I can't tell you that I practice everything I've said. It's something I'm still working with,
I have a very simple question. Can you tell me the role that humor has and plays in nursing?
Well, I will respond to that first, and then the others may have. I think that humor is a very spiritual practice and a very healing practice. And if you are stressed, it's one of the best stress relievers. And that humor is essential, I think. I mean, it's, I just remember, there's just different things that I think of in relation to humor and laughter. And that sense that we are given laughter, that laughing, especially a very good belly laugh, is like a whole internal massage. And so bringing humor into our practice, whatever it is or wherever it is, that, to me, the spiritual path isn't a solemn, I mean, if it were, to me, it's a spiritual path being solemn is kind of like thinking of the streets of heaven paved with gold and sitting with harps all day. I mean, that doesn't sound like a very exciting or fun place to be for me. And so that sense that we have to be able to laugh and to share those lighter moments, that to me is very, very important.
The Bible says a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. And in Science and Health, Mrs. Eddy gave a short list of qualities that a nurse should have. And the first on the list was cheerful. The nurse should be cheerful. And just, to bring that sense of joy and lightheartedness and hopefulness into a room. Feeling bad can be mesmeric. It's like self-hypnosis. And you can't, laughter breaks that. Cheerfulness lightens that sense of heaviness. And it really is a very practical curative power. Yeah.
And it's contagious.
Yeah.
And it connects us.
This teacher said that unless he had a good laugh with his students each day, he felt it was a failure. He felt that was a unifying force, just like you said.
I was told a story one time of a man who had worked, I think it was in South Dakota, but it was with one of the native tribes, and he had been invited, he'd worked there for a while and had finally been invited to one of their spiritual ceremonies. So he went to the house and people were gathered, and he was sort of sitting in the corner trying to get himself centered and wanting to be serious and solemn with this, and they're cracking jokes here and cracking jokes there, and he's still trying to be just trying to get himself ready for this. I mean, he'd been there for several years and this was the first time. Finally, there was a joke that he couldn't help but laughing at. He laughed, they went off to the ceremony. Afterwards, his host had said, we were just waiting for you to laugh. We couldn't begin until you had laughed, because humor and laughter brings you into the present moment. And you can't, if you're laughing at something, you're right here again. And so that was important.
It's also, we forget ourselves when we laugh, get outside.
This one phrase I remember that C.S. Lewis said, sneaking past the dragons of self-consciousness. And I think what you're talking about, you lose that sense of self-consciousness when you laugh.
Yeah, that's good.
Good evening, and thank you for sharing so much this evening. I just wanted to share something from my experience. I am doing a qualitative study looking at how patients view visits with their providers. And I spoke with one patient who shared with me that it was a physician. The physician came in and was speaking with her about her history, but really wasn't wasn't present with her and wasn't spending time. And she, told me all about the visit, but how she ended her conversation with me was that I just wanted me some love. So it's just to say that love is the foundation of our practice with human beings, I believe. So thank you.
Thank you. And it too is contagious.
Everything that we're talking about in relation to nursing and love and spirituality and nursing is something that each of us can practice in our own lives, in every interaction. And that is what brings the healing to our world. And it just reminded me of something else that Florence Nightingale taught, and that was one of the things with her nurses that she especially said to focus on is to take this out into every home and teach the mothers, because they are the ones who are going to be caring for the children. And that, again, the sense of who is a nurse, in this sense of being a caring presence, we are all called to be healers, to be nurses, because we are all spiritual. And so in every interaction that any of us has, by coming from our center, this helps to change the whole environment of the world. And certainly in your own work setting, no matter what you do, in your own home setting, to stay there.
Well, we've all got lots to do, but it's been wonderful spending this time with the three of you. So thank you so much, Peggy and Linda and Jean. And thank you all for coming and being here with us this evening. And we wish you well and be wonderful nurses. So thanks for being here tonight. And if you'll want to join us for a little reception afterwards, we'd be pleased to talk with you then as well. Well, thank you again.